Phone buzzed insistently in my pocket, pulling me away from my thoughts. I wiped the sweat from my brow and stepped outside the makeshift clinic, where the midday sun cast long shadows over the small, rural village. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Victor. I almost didn't answer. After years of dealing with my stepfather's antics, I knew calls from him rarely brought good news. But curiosity, and maybe a sliver of hope, got the better of me. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice even, neutral. "Isabel!" Victor's voice came through annoyingly chipper. "I just wanted to let you know. I sold the cabin in the mountains." I froze. The world around me seemed to stop for a second, the air suddenly thick and suffocating. The phone felt like it might slip from my hand. "You what?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but the disbelief in my tone was unmistakable. Victor repeated himself as though it were the most casual thing in the world. "Sold it. It's for the greater good, obviously. Mine, of course." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, an all-consuming rage threatening to bubble over. The cabin wasn't just a place for me, it was my sanctuary. The one spot where I could breathe freely, far away from the world's noise. A place where I could connect with myself, with nature, and most importantly, with the memories of my late mother. Victor had no right to it, no claim to it. I felt a fire ignite within me, but I forced myself to stay calm, keeping my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. "You had no right," I said, my words low but firm. "That cabin wasn't yours to sell." Victor's laughter on the other end sent a wave of disgust through me. "Relax, Isabel. You're not even here most of the time. I've been managing things for you. Besides, selling it cleared up a lot of my debts. You'll thank me later." "Thank you?" I scoffed, my voice rising now. "I'll thank you when hell freezes over," I snapped before slamming the phone down. I stood there, staring at the ground as the fury pulsed through me. How dare he? How could he take something so personal from me without even consulting me? I had co-owned that cabin with my best friend, Eleanor, for years. It wasn't just a property, it was the essence of my childhood, a piece of me. And for Victor to treat it like a mere asset to be sold off at his convenience was infuriating. But as angry as I was, a cold, rational part of me began to take over. This wasn't over. Victor may have thought he'd outsmarted me, but he hadn't taken into account the co-ownership agreement Eleanor and I had signed years ago. The contract required both of our signatures for any sale to go through. He didn't have the legal right to sell it without her consent. I grabbed my phone again, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed Eleanor's number. It only took a few rings before she answered, her voice cheerful as always. "Hey, Isabel. What's up?" "Eleanor," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Victor sold the cabin." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Eleanor's voice came back, steady but incredulous. "He what? No way." "He sold it. Apparently he needed the money for some gambling debts," I said, bitterly, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. "And he thinks he can just do whatever he wants with it." "Well, he can't," Eleanor said firmly. "You and I both know the agreement. He can't sell it without your consent." Relief washed over me, but only briefly. The anger still churned inside me, threatening to overtake my calm exterior. "Exactly. He doesn't have the right. But we need to stop this. Can you pull up the legal documents? I'll finish up my assignment here, but I need to get back home as soon as I can." "I'm on it," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "I'll make sure everything's in order. We'll take care of this, I promise." I hung up and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. For years, I had allowed Victor to walk all over me, manipulating situations, playing the victim, and getting away with it every time. But this was different. This wasn't just about a cabin. This was about boundaries, about taking control, and about standing up for what was mine. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings. Every time I thought about Victor and his smug face, my anger flared again, but I kept it in check. I was no longer the same person he had once walked all over. I was prepared now. This wasn't just about reclaiming the cabin. This was about proving to myself and to him that I could take control of my own life. Victor, of course, hadn't gone quietly. He tried calling a few more times, each message more desperate than the last. But I ignored him. He thought he could manipulate me again, twist things in his favor like he had so many times before. But he was wrong. Late one afternoon, as I sat in my office reviewing some documents, my phone buzzed again. I didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something about the urgency in his calls made me hesitate. I needed to hear it from him directly. I answered, my voice cool and collected. "What is it now, Victor?" His tone was different this time. Gone was the smug arrogance. Instead, there was something almost pleading in his voice. "Isabel, listen. We need to talk." I crossed my arms over my chest. "I think we've said everything that needs to be said. The cabin is still ours, and your sale was invalid. What else could there possibly be to discuss?" No, you don't understand," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "You have to stop this. You don't know what I'm up against. People are coming after me, Isabel. They're threatening me. You think you can just play games with the law, but I've got real problems here." "Your problems are your own, Victor," I replied sharply. "And none of them involve me. You made your choices. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences." "Consequences? You're ruining me," he snapped. "I'm trying to survive here, and you're making it worse. You have no idea how deep I'm in." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do we do?" "We can't let this go unnoticed," she said, her tone resolute. "We need to escalate this. Get the authorities involved now, before it goes any further. This isn't just about the cabin anymore. This is about protecting yourself." I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me. "You're right. It's time we take this to the next level. I'll call Detective Miller." As soon as I hung up, I dialed the detective's number. I had to act fast. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. This was bigger than I'd ever anticipated. Detective Miller picked up after 2 rings. "Miss Daniels," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of seriousness. "What's going on?" "I need your help," I said, my voice firm. "I've got a situation here that could escalate quickly. Victor is trying to make this harder than it already is, and I need to know what legal actions we can take immediately." "You're sure about this?" Detective Miller asked, his tone more urgent now. "You want to press charges for harassment or intimidation?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I'd been carrying over the past few weeks. "Yes, I think it's time. This is bigger than just the cabin. It's about my safety, and I need your help to make sure it doesn't go any further." "We'll make it happen," he said, the determination clear in his voice. "I'll contact the team and get a plan in motion. Stay safe, Miss Daniels. We'll handle it from here." I hung up, a surge of relief washing over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't alone in this. The wheels were in motion, and this time, it wasn't just about protecting the cabin. It was about protecting myself from the man who had tried to control my life for far too long. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I packed up my things and prepared for the next step. The moment Victor had stepped over the line, it was no longer just a matter of reclaiming what was mine. It was a matter of survival. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept racing, constantly running through every scenario. I couldn't let my guard down. If Victor was truly behind all this, I had to be ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I received a strange email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "You don't know who you're messing with." I opened it cautiously, my heart hammering in my chest. The message was short and direct. Victor won't back down. He's already made his move. The cabin is already sold. You're too late. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. How could that be possible? I'd just spoken to the authorities. The sale hadn't gone through. There was no way Victor could have finalized anything without the legal paperwork. I quickly shot a message to Eleanor. Did Victor sell it again? Is this some kind of trick? Her response was almost immediate. I don't know, but we need to get to the bottom of this. Just as I was about to reach out to Detective Miller, I heard a knock at the door. I glanced through the peephole and saw a man standing there, dressed in a suit and carrying a briefcase. I didn't recognize him. Cautiously, I opened the door. Can I help you? I asked, my voice cautious but firm. He flashed a quick smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Are you Isabel Daniels? He asked, his tone polite but with an underlying sense of urgency. Yes, I said, narrowing my eyes. Who are you? I'm John Carter, he said, extending a hand. I'm here representing the buyer of your cabin. There's been a small issue with the transaction and we need to sort it out quickly. I've been instructed to finalize the sale immediately. I felt a chill run down my spine. The buyer? What buyer? I hadn't heard a word about this until now. I'm afraid you're mistaken, I said, stepping back. The cabin isn't for sale. There's been some confusion. The previous deal was invalid. Mr. Carter's smile didn't falter, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. I'm afraid that's not true. The sale has gone through, and my client is expecting full transfer of ownership. I stared at him, my mind racing. The sale wasn't supposed to be happening. It was supposed to be blocked. But this man, whoever he was standing here telling me that the deal had already been completed. You're lying, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I even realized I'd said them. Mr. Carter's expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of impatience. You may want to reconsider your position, Miss Daniels. My client has invested a significant amount of money, and they're not going to take kindly to delays. Before I could respond, he turned and walked off the porch without another word, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the morning. I stood there for a long time, my heart racing, the implications of his words sinking in. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But if this man was involved, I had a feeling I was walking into deeper waters than I had anticipated. I immediately called Eleanor, my pulse quickening as I recounted the conversation with Mr. Carter. What did this mean for us? Was the sale truly final, or was this just another one of Victor's schemes to force me into submission? As I hung up, I could feel the storm coming. And I had no idea how it was going to end. The following morning, I barely slept. The words from the email, the man at the door, everything was crashing down on me, and I could feel the storm brewing in ways I couldn't predict. The cabin, my childhood sanctuary, had become the epicenter of a battle I never signed up for. It wasn't just about a piece of property anymore. It was about control, about power, about taking back what was mine, before Victor and his associates could destroy it for good. I couldn't afford to waste any more time. I grabbed my phone, dialing Eleanor's number before I even had a chance to think about it. Isabel? She answered, her voice steady but with a sharp edge. What happened? Mr. Carter was here, I said quickly. He claims the sale went through, that the cabin is officially sold. What the hell is going on? There was a pause on the other end, and then Eleanor's voice came back, tight with frustration. That's not possible. We've got the legal right to block this. The paperwork hasn't been filed. No official transfer has happened. I don't know who this guy is, but he's lying. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. You're sure? I'm positive. she said firmly. But we need to act fast. Victor is getting desperate, and I don't think he's going to stop until he gets what he wants. I didn't need any further explanation. I'll call Detective Miller. We need to get ahead of this. I'll let you know what he says. After hanging up, I immediately called Detective Miller. His voice was calm when he answered, but I could hear the underlying tension. "Miss Daniels," he said, his tone serious. "What's going on?" "Victor is trying to make a move again," I explained. "There's a man here saying the sale went through. He claims the cabin's been officially sold, but that doesn't make sense. It hasn't even been processed through the courts." There was a long pause on the other end. "Are you sure about this?" Miller asked. "You're certain the sale hasn't gone through?" "Yes," I said firmly. "We're still in control, but something is off. I think Victor might be trying to use some backdoor methods to get this done. We need to find out who Mr. Carter really is and why he's involved." "We'll investigate," Miller said, his voice firm. "I'll have my team look into this immediately. I don't like the sound of this. Let me take it from here." I hung up with a mixture of relief and dread. The wheels were in motion now, but the stakes had never been higher. Victor wasn't playing by the rules anymore, and as much as I hated to admit it, I was starting to realize that this wasn't just about the cabin. It was about Victor's need to control everything. He wasn't going to let go without a fight. That afternoon, I decided to visit the cabin again. It had always been my refuge, but now it felt more like a battleground. As I drove up the familiar winding road, my mind raced with the possibilities. If the sale was really happening behind our backs, if it was moving forward despite the legal obstacles, what could we do? What would be left? When I arrived, the place looked the same as always, quiet, serene, almost welcoming. But the silence felt different now. The weight of everything that had happened, of what might still happen, hung in the air like an unspoken threat. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the fresh mountain air. I couldn't let Victor win. I couldn't let him take everything that was important to me without a fight. I couldn't let him destroy this last piece of my mother's legacy, the one place that still felt like home. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Eleanor. "Carter's background check just came through. He's a hired contractor, works for someone named Roland Hughes. Have you heard of him?" I quickly typed back, "No, but I need to know more. Can you dig deeper?" Eleanor's response was quick. "On it. Be careful." I stood there, the weight of the situation sinking in. Roland Hughes. The name didn't ring any immediate bells, but something told me this wasn't a coincidence. Victor had deep connections, more than I'd realized. And now, I was up against not just him, but someone far more powerful. Before I could process everything, I heard a car pull up behind me. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to find a sleek black sedan parked in front of the cabin. A man stepped out, dressed in a sharp suit, his expression unreadable. I didn't recognize him, but I knew instantly that he wasn't just any visitor. This was someone with authority, someone who had come here with a purpose. I took a step forward, meeting him halfway. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice firm, though my pulse. He studied me for a moment before answering, his voice smooth but cold. "Isabel Daniels?" I nodded. "Roland Hughes," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "I've been instructed to finalize the matter regarding your property." My stomach dropped. So this was Roland Hughes, the man behind the man who had been trying to steal what was mine, the person pulling the strings. I swallowed, trying to keep my composure. "You can't finalize anything. The sale isn't valid. We have a co-ownership agreement, and Victor doesn't have the authority to sell." Hughes's eyes flashed with something dark, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the power behind his presence. "This isn't a negotiation, Miss Daniels. The deal is done. and you're in no position to stop it. I shook my head, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. You don't get to decide that. Not without my consent. I'm not backing down. His lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't one that brought any comfort. We'll see about that, he said, his voice low and final. And with that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing across the porch like a death knell. I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. Roland Hughes wasn't just a player in this game. He was the one pulling the strings. And if Victor thought he had the upper hand, he was gravely mistaken. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to let anyone take what was mine. I quickly called Eleanor, my heart pounding in my chest. It's Hughes. He's the one behind all this. He's not backing down. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. As I hung up, I could feel the walls closing in. Would we be able to stop the sale before it was too late? Or was the battle already lost? I sat in the cabin long after Roland Hughes had left, the weight of his words pressing on me. Every inch of this place now felt like it was slipping away, like the walls themselves were closing in on me. I had fought so hard to protect it. This was my home, my sanctuary. And now, standing on the edge of losing it, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. It was about fighting for my peace, my autonomy, my past. And I wasn't going to let Victor, or anyone, take that from me without a fight. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed Eleanor's number. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This had turned into something personal, something far deeper than I had ever imagined. Isabel? Eleanor's voice was urgent, but there was a crack of hope in it. I've been digging. Roland Hughes isn't just a businessman. He's tied to some heavy hitters, people who don't take no for an answer. I know, I replied, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. He came by the cabin. He thinks he can just take it, but he's not going to get away with it. Isabel, you need to be careful, she warned, her voice tight. Victor and Hughes aren't going to back down. Not now. We need to make sure we're ahead of them, not reacting to them. I've got it covered, I said, though even I wasn't sure if I truly believed it. But I'm not going to back down either. This cabin is mine. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the evening pacing the cabin, replaying every conversation, every encounter with Victor and his associates. How had things escalated so quickly? How had I gone from being a passive participant in my own life to being dragged into this battle for control? By the time night fell, my resolve was clearer than ever. I wasn't going to let Roland Hughes or Victor win. They had underestimated me at every turn, and I was ready to make them regret it. The next morning, I met with Detective Miller in person. His expression was grim, the weight of everything we'd discussed now fully realized. He handed me a file, and I opened it to find the information I had been hoping for. We've got him, Miller said, his tone low but confident. Roland Hughes has a history: fraud, manipulation, and worst of all, intimidation. We've got enough evidence to take him down, Isabel. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. You'll need to act fast, Miller continued. We'll back you up, but we need you to make the next move. The sooner we can get him off the streets, the better. I'm ready, I said, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. Let's finish this. By noon, the cease and desist letter had been sent to Roland Hughes. We had the legal paperwork, the evidence of the invalid sale, and now we just needed to make sure that Victor and his associates knew that I wasn't going down without a fight. This wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming my life. But before we could make any further moves, another unexpected visitor showed up at the cabin. I was sitting on the porch when the familiar black sedan pulled up once more. My stomach tightened. It was him again, Roland Hughes. This time there was no negotiation, no polite introductions. He stepped out of the car with an air of finality, his face set in stone. His eyes locked on mine as he walked towards the cabin, his every step deliberate and ominous. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" he said, his voice low and almost bored. "This is over, Isabel. You've done your part. It's time to walk away." "I'm not going anywhere," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "This cabin is mine, and you're not going to take it from me." He smiled then, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was a smile that spoke of secrets, of threats, and of a man who thought he could bend anyone to his will. "You're out of your depth," he said. "This is bigger than you, and if you keep pushing, you're going to find out just how big it really is." For the first time, I felt the full weight of his threat, but something inside me hardened, and I stood taller, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You've underestimated me," I said, my voice calm, but with a sharpness that cut through the air. "I've been underestimated my whole life, and you're no different." Before he could respond, my phone rang. It was Detective Miller. "Isabel, you need to leave the cabin. Now," Miller said, his voice urgent. "We've got a lead on Roland. He's not just a businessman. He's involved in criminal activities we didn't even know about. The authorities are moving in, and it's too dangerous for you to stay there." My heart raced as I looked at Roland, standing across the yard, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the shift. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice low. "You don't need to know, just leave. We're coming to get him. It's over," Miller said before hanging up. I turned to Roland, who stood frozen, his gaze shifting from me to the approaching sirens in the distance. His expression went cold, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. He knew the game was up, but he wasn't backing down yet. He made a move to step toward the car, but before he could react, the authorities were on him, swarming the yard like a storm. I didn't stay to watch. I didn't need to. The battle was over. Hours later, I sat in the living room of the cabin, the silence now calming rather than oppressive. The police had taken Hughes into custody, and the investigation into Victor's involvement was already underway. But as the weight of everything that had happened began to sink in, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time I'd have to face Victor. His grip on the past may have been severed, but his influence had only just begun to show its true colors. I couldn't help but wonder, had I really won? Or was this just the beginning of a new chapter in this twisted saga?